What happens when a late-night interview goes from friendly banter to absolute chaos in a matter of minutes? Tonight, we're breaking down the moment Lily Allen walked onto Jimmy Fallon's stage and everything fell apart. This wasn't your typical celebrity interview. What started as casual conversation turned into one of the most uncomfortable exchanges in late-night television history. And it all happened live in front of a studio audience. Before we get into exactly what was said that caused security to get involved, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me who you think was in the wrong here. Trust me, you're going to have opinions. So, Lily Allen walks out, and the energy is already a bit off. Jimmy's doing his usual thing, big smile, enthusiastic welcome. But if you watch closely, you can see Lily's body language is stiff. She sits down, crosses her legs, and there's this moment where Jimmy leans forward with that classic talk show host excitement and says, "So, Lily, you're back in New York. You're performing again. Tell us what you've been up to." Pretty standard opening, right? But Lily just looks at him for a second too long before answering. She goes, "Well, Jimmy, I've been writing, which you'd know if you actually listen to any of my recent work." The audience does that nervous laugh thing where they're not sure if it's a joke or not. Jimmy laughs too, but you can see his eyes do this quick, scan like he's trying to figure out if she's serious. He recovers pretty fast, though. That's his job. And he says, "Of course I listen. I'm a huge fan. I was actually just telling the producers backstage how much I love your new stuff." And Lily just tilts her head slightly and goes, "Really? Which song's your favorite then?" Now Jimmy's in a position. He clearly hasn't listened. Or if he has, he can't remember specifics in the moment, and you can see him trying to think fast. He does this thing where he laughs and gestures vaguely and says, "Oh, there are so many. I don't want to pick favorites. They're all great." Classic deflection. But Lily doesn't let it go. She leans back in her chair and says, "No, go on. Name one. Just one song from my last album." The audience is dead silent now. This isn't playful anymore. Jimmy tries to laugh it off, does his desk slap thing, says, "Come on, you're putting me on the spot here." But Lily cuts him off. She says, "I'm putting you on the spot. You invited me on your show. You're supposed to interview me about my music, and you haven't listened to a single track, have you?" The way she says it isn't even angry. It's just matter of fact, which somehow makes it worse. Jimmy's smile is still there, but it's frozen now, and he tries to redirect. He says, Okay, you got me. I've been so busy with the show, but that's why you're here to tell me about it, to tell everyone about it." Lily doesn't move. She just stares at him and says, "That's the problem, though, isn't it? We come on these shows. We promote our work. And you lot just want us to play along with your scripted jokes and fake enthusiasm. You don't actually care about what we're doing. You care about ratings." Jimmy's face changes. Then the host's smile drops for just a second, and he says, "That's not fair. We have hundreds of guests. I can't possibly." And Lily interrupts him. She says, "Then maybe don't book people whose work you have no interest in. It's disrespectful." The audience doesn't know what to do. Some people are clapping, but it's scattered and confused. Jimmy looks at his desk, looks at his notes, and you can tell he's trying to figure out how to save this. He takes a breath and says, "Look, I apologize if you feel disrespected. That wasn't my intention. Why don't we start over, and you can tell us about the album?" Lily shakes her head. She says, "I don't want to start over. I want to have a real conversation, not this manufactured nonsense where you pretend to care for 8 minutes, and then I leave." Jimmy's getting frustrated now. You can hear it in his voice when he says, "I do care. I invited you here. I'm giving you a platform." And Lily laughs, but it's not a nice laugh. She says, "A platform? You're giving me a platform? Jimmy, I've sold millions of records. I don't need your platform. I thought this was going to be an actual interview, not whatever this is." She gestures around vaguely at the set, the cameras, everything. Jimmy sits back in his chair, and there's this moment where neither of them says anything. The band isn't playing. The audience isn't laughing. It's just awkward silence on live television. Then Jimmy leans forward and says, "With all due respect, I think maybe you're having a bad day and taking out on me. That's when Lily's expression really changes. She uncrosses her legs, sits forward, and says, "Excuse me." Jimmy doubles down. He says, "I'm just saying, I've interviewed thousands of people, and this energy you're bringing right now is not normal. Maybe there's something else going on." Lily's eyes narrow, and she says, "So now you're psychoanalyzing me on your show." In front of all these people, Jimmy throws his hands up and says, "I'm trying to figure out why you came on my show. Just attack me." The audience is fully uncomfortable now. You can hear people shifting in their seats. Lily stands up, which nobody expected, and says, "I didn't come here to attack you. I came here hoping for a real conversation, and instead I got exactly what I expected, which is nothing." She starts to unhook her microphone, and Jimmy stands up too, says, "Lily, come on. Sit down. Let's talk about this." But she's already walking. That's when things escalate beyond just an uncomfortable interview. Jimmy calls out, "Lily, please just sit down for a second." And there's this desperation in his voice because he knows this is spiraling. But Lily stops walking, turned around, and here's where it gets really intense. She walks back to the chair, but she doesn't sit. She stands there with the microphone still in her hand, even though it's disconnected. And she says, "You want me to sit down? Fine. Let's actually talk then. Let's talk about how this industry works." Jimmy looks relieved for a second, thinking maybe he can salvage this. And he says, "Okay, great. Yes, let's do that." Lily points at the audience and says, "These people paid money to be here tonight. They took time out of their lives to come sit in this studio. And what do they get? They get scripted bits, fake laughs, and hosts who don't care about their guests beyond what ratings they bring." Jimmy's face goes red and he says, "That is not true. I care about every single person who sits in that chair." Lily shoots back immediately. "Then why didn't you prepare? Why didn't you take 10 minutes to listen to even one song?" Jimmy says, "I told you I've been busy. We do a show every single night." And Lily just shakes her head and says, "So have I. I perform every single night. I write, I record, I promote, and somehow I still manage to do my homework when someone asks me to show up somewhere. It's called professionalism." The audience is starting to react now, and it's mixed. Some people are clapping for Lily. Others are booing. Some are just sitting there in shock. Jimmy hears the boos, and it seems to give him confidence. He says, "You know what? Maybe I didn't listen to every track on your album, but I don't think that gives you the right to come on my show and insult me in front of my audience." Lily laughs again, that same harsh laugh, and says, "Your audience? They're not your audience, Jimmy. They're just people. They don't belong to you, and neither do I. I'm not some prop you can use for content." Jimmy's losing his composure now. He says, "Then why did you agree to come on the show? Seriously, if you have such a problem with how I do things, why are you here?" Lily goes quiet for a moment, and when she speaks again, her voice is lower, more serious. She says, "Because I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I thought maybe I'd get to actually talk about my work with someone who gave a damn, but I was wrong." Again, Jimmy sits back down at his desk, and you can see him trying to regain control of the situation. He looks at the camera, does that thing where he addresses the audience at home, and says, "Well, folks, this is certainly not how we expected the night to go." Lily immediately says, "Don't do that. Don't talk to the camera like I'm not standing right here. Look at me." Jimmy turns to her and says, "What do you want me to say, Lily? What would make you happy right now?" She takes a step closer to the desk and says, "I want you to admit that you don't care. I want you to admit that every single guest who comes through that door is just a means to an end for you, that we're all just here to fill time between commercial breaks." Jimmy stands back up and his voice gets louder. He says, "That's not fair and you know it. I love what I do. I love meeting people, hearing their stories, and yes, entertaining people. That's my job." Lily nods and says, "Entertaining people?" "Exactly. Not interviewing them, not having real conversations. Entertaining them." The band leader is trying to get Jimmy's attention, probably to suggest they go to commercial, but Jimmy waves him off. He's fully engaged in this argument now. He says, "What's wrong with entertainment? People need to laugh. They need to escape from their problems for a while. Lily says, there's nothing wrong with entertainment, but call it what it is. Don't pretend this is journalism. Don't pretend you're giving artists a platform, when really you're just using them for content. Jimmy walks around the desk, now getting closer to where Lily is standing, and says, I have never used anyone. Every guest who comes on this show is treated with respect. The audience seems split. Half of them are nodding along with Jimmy, half with Lily. She says, respect? You call not even knowing my work respectful? You call cutting me off mid-sentence respectful? You call trying to gaslight me into thinking I'm having a bad day instead of admitting you messed up respectful? That word gaslight seems to really hit Jimmy. He says, I did not gaslight you. I was trying to understand where this hostility was coming from. Lily says, it's not hostility. It's honesty. And you can't handle it because you're so used to people playing along with your little show. Jimmy's voice goes up another level. He says, my little show? This little show employs hundreds of people. This little show has been on the air for years. This little show has given countless artists exposure they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Lily doesn't back down. She says, and every single one of those artists had to smile and nod and pretend like it was such an honor to be here. Even when you clearly didn't care about their work, I'm just the first one honest enough to say out loud. Jimmy points at her and says, no, you're not honest. You're rude. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty. And right now you're being cruel. The audience gasps at that. Lily's mouth opens slightly, like she's genuinely surprised. He said that. She takes a breath and says, I'm being cruel for expecting you to do your job, for expecting the bare minimum. Jimmy says, the bare minimum? I invited you on one of the biggest talk shows in the country. I gave you a segment. I was prepared to talk about your album, your tour, whatever you wanted, but instead you came out here with an agenda. Lily shakes her head vigorously and says, I didn't have an agenda. I had expectations, and you failed to meet them. Jimmy runs his hand through his hair, clearly stressed, and says, you know what? I think we need to end this interview. Lily says, there was no interview. That's the whole point. You asked me one question, and then we started arguing because you couldn't answer a simple question about my music. Jimmy says, because you were testing me. You were trying to make me look bad from the start. Lily's voice gets louder. She says, I was giving you a chance to prove me wrong. I wanted you to surprise me, but you couldn't even do that. The producers are definitely trying to get Jimmy's attention now. You can see people in the wings waving, pointing at their watches. Jimmy sees them and says, we need to go to commercial. Lily says, of course you do. Run away from the conversation. That's what you people do. Jimmy snaps back, what do you mean, you people? Lily says, television hosts, people who build careers on being fake. Jimmy's face is completely red now, and he says, I am not fake. I'm genuine with every single person I meet. Lily looks at him for a long moment, and then says something that clearly cuts deep. She says, if you're so genuine, why does every interview feel exactly the same? Why does every guest get the same treatment, the same fake enthusiasm, the same scripted questions? You're not genuine, Jimmy. You're a brand, and that's fine, but don't lie to yourself about it. Jimmy's hands are shaking now, and he says, I think you need to leave right now. Just go. Lily crosses her arms and says, I was already leaving before you begged me to come back. Jimmy says, I didn't beg you. I asked you to sit down so we could have a civil conversation. But clearly you're incapable of that. Lily takes a step forward and says, I'm incapable. You're the one who couldn't handle a single moment of honesty without falling apart. Jimmy says, I'm not falling apart. I'm trying to protect my show from whatever this is. He gestures at her wildly. She says, your show? What about my reputation? What about my career? You think this is good for me? You think I wanted this to happen? Jimmy says, then why did you keep pushing? Why didn't you just answer the questions and move on like everyone else? And Lily says something that makes the whole audience go silent. She says, because I'm tired pretending. I'm tired of watching artists demean themselves for 5 minutes of airtime on shows that don't respect them. Somebody had to say it, And I guess tonight it was me. Jimmy looks at the audience, then back at Lily and says, "You don't speak for other artists. Don't act like you're some martyr here." Lily says, "I'm not a martyr. I'm just done playing the game. And if that makes me the villain in your story, fine. I'll be the villain." Jimmy says, "There are no villains here. This is just a massive misunderstanding that spiraled out of control." Lily shakes her head and says, "No, you understand perfectly. You just don't like being called out." At this point, someone from production walks onto the stage. It's a producer, and he tries to speak quietly to Jimmy, but everyone can hear him say, "We need to go to commercial now." Jimmy holds up a finger like, "Give me a second," and turns back to Lily. He says, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry you feel disrespected. That was never my intention." Lily looks at him, and you can see her face soften just slightly. She says, "I don't want your apology. I want things to change, but they won't because this is bigger than you or me." Jimmy says, "What does that mean?" Lily says, "It means the whole system is broken. These shows, these interviews, the way we promote music and art, all of it, it's all just content creation. Nobody cares about the actual work anymore." Jimmy's voice gets quieter and he says, "I care. Maybe I didn't show it tonight. Maybe I should have prepared better, but I do care." Lily studies his face for a moment and then says, "Maybe you do, but it doesn't matter. The machine keeps running whether you care or not." The producer steps forward again, more insistent this time, and says, "Jimmy, we really need to." But Jimmy cuts him off. He says, "Just give me one more minute." He looks back at Lily and says, "So what now? What happens now?" Lily shrugs and says, "I leave, you do damage control. We both become a viral moment for a few days, and then everyone forgets. That's how this works, right?" Jimmy doesn't respond immediately. The audience is completely silent watching this play out. Then Lily does something unexpected. She holds out her hand for a handshake. Jimmy looks at it confused and says, "What are you doing?" Lily says, "I'm ending this. We can't undo what just happened, but we don't have to part as enemies." Jimmy stares at her hand for a few seconds, and you can see him processing everything. Then he reaches out and shakes it. The audience starts clapping tentatively at first, then louder, but the moment doesn't last. As they're shaking hands, Lily says, "But for the record, you still should have listened to my album." Jimmy pulls his hand back and says, "Are you serious right now? We're shaking hands and you're still." And Lily interrupts, "I'm just being honest." Jimmy throws his hands up in the air and says, "That's it. We're done. Security, can you please escort her out?" The audience gasps. Half of them start booing. The other half are cheering. It's complete chaos. Lily backs away from the desk and says, "You're actually calling security on me." Jimmy says, "You've disrupted my show, insulted me repeatedly, and now you won't leave." "Yes, I'm calling security." 2 security guards appear from the wings, and Lily looks at them, then back at Jimmy. She says, "This is how you want this to end. This is your big finale." Jimmy doesn't answer. He just stands there with his arms crossed. One of the security guards approaches Lily carefully and says something quiet that the microphones don't pick up. Lily nods at him, then looks out at the audience. She says loudly, "I hope you all got the entertainment you paid for tonight." The sarcasm in her voice is unmistakable. Some audience members laugh. Others look uncomfortable. She starts walking toward the exit with the security guards flanking her, not touching her, just guiding her off stage. But right before she reaches the wings, she turns around one last time. Jimmy's sitting back at his desk now, trying to compose himself. And Lily says, "Hey, Jimmy." He looks up. She says, "Next time you book a musician, maybe actually listen to their music first. It's not that hard." And then she's gone. The security guards disappear with her into the backstage area, and the studio is left in stunned silence. Jimmy sits there for what feels like forever, but is probably only 10 seconds. Then he looks at the camera and says, "Well, that happened." Some people in the audience laugh nervously. He continues, "We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, We have a really fun cooking segment planned where he glances at his notes with Chef Mario Romano, so stick around for that. The band starts playing the commercial music, but you can see Jimmy just sitting there, not moving, staring at his desk. The camera stays on him for a few extra seconds before cutting away. And in those seconds, you can see everything. The stress, the embarrassment, the anger, the confusion, all of it written across his face. This wasn't supposed to happen. Talk shows don't go like this. Guests don't walk off. Hosts don't call security. But it happened, and everyone saw it. So, what do you think? Was Lily out of line for calling Jimmy out? Or was she right to expect him to actually know her work? Was Jimmy wrong for not preparing? Or was Lily too aggressive from the start? Could this have been resolved differently? Or was this confrontation inevitable the moment she sat down? The comment section is going to be wild on this one. And honestly, I can see valid points on both sides. But that's what makes this so fascinating. This wasn't just a celebrity feud. This was a conversation about respect, professionalism, and what we expect from entertainment. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because we're going to keep covering moments like this, the unscripted, unfiltered, uncomfortable moments that show us what really happens when a facade drops. Hit that like button if you made it this far, and drop a comment answering this question. If you were in the audience that night, would you have been Team Lily or Team Jimmy?